Hi, welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. I'm Melissa Muir. In this video, I want to introduce you to a system that you may have actually seen before, maybe not figured out how it works, or maybe you're just looking for a review, and this is that video. So in this video, I'm going to cover and introduce the new tool by Brandvik called a Castellated bezel making system. Now, what is a castellated bezel? Castellated bezel is a bezel similar to this, where you can see that you have these little grooves that are cut into the bezel. You'll also notice that it's a very, very thick bezel. This one happens to be 18 gauge, and that's what we're going to be using in this video as well. And what that allows you to do is create these really thick bezels, but still have the ability to move them over. So let's take a look and see what's involved in creating this. Now, to start, before I even get into working with the tools or anything, I need to have my piece ready to go. So in this case, I have an ingot that I've rolled out to about 18 gauge. I just did this on my rolling mill. And what I've got now is a stone. In this case, I have a faceted labradorite. It has a little thicker wall to this, and that is going to make this particular setting ideal for this type of a bezel, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any number of things. The first thing that I need to do, though, is I need to figure out the height of what I need for my bezel. So I like to use a divider on this. I'll put it down here at the bottom of the stone, and I'm going to adjust this so that I get into where the stone begins to curve over, because that is what we want to do. We want to take that metal and bend it over our stone. So I don't want to go too far or too high, but I also don't want to be too low. I definitely need to make it so that I hit that curve. If I do happen to make my bezel material too high, I can always lift my stone a little bit underneath, and I usually do for all of my stones anyway. So at this point, I'm going to consider this pretty good. This has a fairly straight edge on my stone. It doesn't curve right away like some stones do. We have a very flat edge, and then it begins to curve. So I'm going to be bringing mine up just a little bit above kind of that girdle of that stone is what I'm going to be working with. So now that I have that set on my dividers, I'm going to just use that and run it along the edge to create a nice sharp line or groove on this. Hopefully you guys can see that here in the video without the light too much on it. So I'm going to cut this out. Now you can use a jeweler's saw, you can use your hand shears, however you want to be very cautious about any kind of deformation that will happen when you're doing that. I now have my piece cut to the right height, but now I'm going to have to figure out what my length is. And I'm not so worried about that quite yet, but let me show you one way to figure this out. One of the things you can do is take some painter's tape, and maybe, there we go. So what you can do is you can take some painter's tape, and I like to just take this and wrap it right around that edge or girdle of my stone, like so. Sometimes it's easier said than done, especially when you're filming a video. So I've created a little mark right here where I want to cut this. I'm just going to follow that up. And now I have the exact length that I'm going to need to create this bezel. So we'll set that aside for just a minute, because what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create all the little grooves of that castellated section here on my bezel. Now to make this, he's created a couple of different tools that are optional. You don't have to have these. However, they are going to make things a lot easier. We have the top jaws, which is going to hold our piece just like so that we can create the top cuts. Then he's created the bez jaws so that after you've created your top cuts, you can lay this into here, and it's cut so that it still sits a little bit above this, and that way then you can create the side grooves. Now these two, like I said, are optional, but they do make things a little bit easier. First, I'm going to use the top jaws and get that top groove cut into my piece. To do this, I like to use a small vise. This is just one that clamps onto my table, and I'm going to tighten this up, and I'm going to hold these jaws in, or my bezel. There's a little groove inside that your bezel will sit right on top of, and so I just need to get my jaws closed tight enough. There we go. Then I can push that down and it will hold into place. So now everything is nice and secure. To do this, he's designed this so that it works with a 3 saw blade, a number 3 saw blade. This is not a 3/0, this is a number 3. It's very, very thick. To create these castellated sections and to make them so that they are even, he has created these indexing tools. Now, there's 2 different indexing tools, and they have a couple of different millimeter sizes on them as far as their spacing goes. So we have a 2 millimeter and a 3 millimeter, a 4 millimeter and a 5 millimeter. And what this will do is it makes it so that you have a nice even spacing between each of your sections on that castellated bezel. To start this off, so let's say we want to do, we'll go with the 2 millimeter sections. So let's say we wanted to do the 2 millimeters. What I would do is take this little indexing part right here, and I'm going to just kind of lay it right up on top of this and push it over to the edge. And that little groove, or that little notch on there, is going to hold it into place. And what that allows us to do now is to place our jeweler's saw right next to this and give a couple of strokes, and that gives us a nice little groove. What I want to do is I'm going to count the number of strokes that I create here so that I can replicate it as I go across. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I have a nice little mark in here. I take the little indexing tool, and if we've used a number 3 soft blade, it's going to fit right into it, and I can do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they should be the same height now. Again, I'm going to place this into the next groove. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, it should be about the same, assuming that you're applying the same amount of pressure, and you're also coming down and using that same length of stroke to go across. And you just would continue to do this all the way across. Now once we have this where we've created all these little grooves here along the top, now it's time to flip this over onto the back side, and we are just going to do some grooves here along the side. Now, unlike the top section where we actually want to go a little deeper, the front section is more just for decorative issues. We don't necessarily want to go down too far because we don't want to cut through the bezel at this point. So coming back to our vise, we're now going to work with the bez jaws. And with the bez jaws, again, I just slip these in here. There is, again, just a nice little groove that's cut into this. And what that does is that holds your material up so that you can lay it into here and be able to create that pattern on here without cutting into your vise. Now, you'll notice that I do occasionally cut into the little aluminum holder, and that's really not a big issue, so don't even worry about that. But it does keep your vise nice and safe, which is really helpful if you've got a very expensive vise too, and it also makes it a little easier to hold this material. That side doesn't want to stick down. My metal kind of has a little bit of a narrow spot in that. What I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to use these grooves that I have created as my guide. I'm going to set this into one of my notches that I've created, and again, I'm just going to give a little bit of a sawing with my saw and just kind of go back and forth a little bit on that. I'm not looking for anything deep. We just want to have kind of a scoring that happens on that. So again, we'll just go to the next. And you're going to repeat this all the way across your piece. And you can always come back in afterwards and even things out if you need to with your saw blade or whatever else. Or you can just leave it. The more you use this, the easier it becomes, and you'll kind of get a feel for what needs to be done.